Hello, everybody. Welcome to the People of Nature podcast. And today with us, we have for the first time a veterinary doctor and marine and wildlife specialist with us, Dr. Suranjana Ganguly. So I will just give a brief introduction of her work in this field. So Suranjana is a dedicated veterinary consultant and conservation specialist with over a decade of expertise in marine megafauna, especially and also captive animal care and wildlife rehab. She has also worked with small animal welfare and medicine. She has a proven track record in rescue operations, rehab protocols, welfare policy management, and veterinary mentorship. She is passionate about building community and integrating scientific research with practical conservation strategies to enhance animal welfare across diverse ecosystems. So we have a very interesting guest with us today for our podcast. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks. That was a really nice introduction. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited. This is my first ever podcast recording.
Yeah, always time for the first one. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for joining us, Suranjana. So, we will start first with your journey into being a veterinary doctor. So, in wildlife, people usually go for wildlife research or on-field conservation, but you chose a different path, which is being a vet, a wildlife vet, which is I would say less taken path, at least in India recently.
Yeah.
We would like to ask you what inspired you to become a vet, and did your affection for animals start early in childhood or it developed over time?
I think early childhood for sure. I mean, I always wanted to work with animals. There was no question. My mother was one of the founders of CUPA, which is a Compassion Unlimited Plus Action, a small animal NGO in Bangalore. And I kind of grew up like I used to finish school and come straight to the shelter. And so my days were filled with washing cages, taking care of stray animals, walking them, cleaning them, doing all kinds of that stuff. And my nights were usually, because those were the days when like it was early on, and it's not like it's changed very much. But honestly, if you worked with animals, that meant in the eyes of the world, that meant you worked with all animals. So whether it was wildlife, stray dogs, elephants, everything came to your house, you know what I mean? So there was lots of wildlife that used to come home when we were young as well. So I've dealt with animals like from the beginning, and there was really honestly nothing else I would rather do. So it had to be somewhere working with animals. And I always loved biology, although we're a very arts family. So I think I'm probably one of the only few people in my family to do science like, and to do medicine. So yeah, it was a big deal at that point. And I kind of knew I wanted to go into this. It was either this or environmental law. But yeah, thank God veterinary medicine happened, I guess. But it all just happened. It wasn't like I decided, that I wanted to be a wildlife vet. I wanted to be a stray dog vet. That's what I wanted to be. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Yes, yes, very interesting story. So it seems like your childhood only involved very formative experiences regarding working with stray animals, and that's how your love started, and you followed it to become a vet. So it's actually a very cool story. Uh,
Yeah, I actually started off. I did my school, and then I after my school I did my BSc in zoology from Xavier's in Bombay. And we used to have a professor in college called Smita ma'am, who I absolutely, I mean, she was such an important person in my life, so in so many ways at that point. Because I remember I wanted to, I was thinking about doing animal behavior, and she was the one who said, listen, you don't have a researcher mentality. You should totally think about doing medicine, and definitely close your eyes and apply to veterinary medicine. I was like, yes, okay, thank you.
that's interesting because, like, yeah, in college years, the council of professors who know us very well is very important, and maybe she saw you someone as who preferred like hands-on working with animals themselves rather than doing the literature studies and observing from far. So I think she might have picked up on something there.
100%. I'm very grateful for her for that also.
Yeah, that's very cool story. So yeah, we will go now to a little bit later stage in your career. So you did your degree in veterinary medicine, and then your first job as a vet was at Rescue Pune, which I also know because their work is very important and very much present here because they directly assist so many rescues here. So,
Yes.
how important was this early exposure to this vet domain, and how was your experience there, basically?
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't my it was my first long job. I did a lot of short jobs all over the place. I was doing lots of internships in the UK, then I went to New Zealand and I was there for a bit, and then I moved to Pune. But yeah, I mean, it was a very defining time in my life because at that point, obviously, Rescue was run by Neha and Tanya, and they had just had their babies, and they were mostly focusing on small animals at that point. So I kind of started with my whole stray dog medicine and welfare journey from there, and we used to have like a little Maruti van that used to drive all over Pune and treat animals
Huh.
on site. So we'd go and we'd treat all these kind, like there was one Labrador who used to live in a signal, like he used to live on this, he was an abandoned lab, and we didn't have a shelter at that point. So he used to live in like there was a hole in like a drain, and that lab, he used to live inside that drain. So every day we'd go and we'd call him, and then
Oh,
he'd come out for his treatment. We'd do his treatment, and then he had a little maggot wound. So we'd go and treat it every day, and then he'd give him food and go back into the drain. So I mean, it was a very funny time, but also lots of, defining moments because, when you first graduate as a vet, and especially me, like there were so many doubts I had about my own skill, about, oh, can I handle this alone? Because there were no other vets. I was literally the only vet in the organization. And then, Neha and Tanya were the ones who kind of pushed me at that point to be like, listen, you have the capability, start a clinic, so I started the rescue clinic in Baner, the small animal clinic in Baner that was started when I was
okay.
there. So it was lots of big things that happened. So it was a defining time, and I learned a lot there as well. So yeah, that was my first
Yeah,
job.
I think when you start out or like you do the first long job and you actually get to apply what you learned, but on the field practically, I think that's when you learn the most. Even in research, I would say it's the same thing. Like when you
Yeah,
actually do it and apply it, that's when you learn the most, and that is very informative and, as you said, defining.
for sure. Like you hit the ground running, and also when you don't have any mentors. I didn't have any senior vets at that point to kind of guide me or anything like that. So I was literally on my own. It was a hard time, but now looking back on it, I mean, I wouldn't have done it any other way.
Sometimes, as they say, you have to uh, hit the uh, hit the water first and figure out the swimming.
Yeah, basically. That was
That kind of
basically me.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Because for me,
Yeah,
even more so because I went to vet school in the UK. So when I came, and in the UK, it's a very different, because obviously it's a much more mature um, industry in that sense, right? Like the veterinary medicine is much bigger than it is here, and it's much more organized, and you have the whole idea of like, and there's a lot more investment in the section. So when we are trained as vets in the UK, you learn with the, like, in a fancy hospital with trained veterinary assistants, with state of the art equipment, and all of those things. So you learn all of that, and then you come back to India, and suddenly you have nothing. You have no mentor. You are you're basically the cleaner, the tech, the handler, the everything. So it was a lot of like reality check, that happened at that point.
yeah. Yeah, I could imagine like a deep, huge difference in the infrastructure there and here, and
Yeah.
also maybe even the protocols of rescue and those things also might be different.
The field is very different, you know what I mean? So like with every country, and that's why it's so important to have local contexts, and you guys also know that as researchers, that you can have all of these contacts made in Western countries telling you how to do it, how to collect data, how to, deal with communities. But when you're on ground and you're doing things, it's always very different in a local context. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And every community and the problems, the wildlife faces in every part of the world, or even within India itself, is very different. So you have to get to know those local
Challenges.
context, definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So we go on to another stint of yours. So you also worked as trauma care vet and surgeon at People for Animals in Mysuru. So, in your observation and in your experience, which animals were most affected by trauma, and how did you work with citizens for the rescue, for any roadside or other kind of
Oh,
rescue?
that's a tough one. So, but anyway, I should also tell you that rescue was my first experience with an elephant was before I became a vet, when I was quite young, when a rescue elephant called Lakshmi from Tumkur Mutt, a begging elephant, she had been brought for treatment to Banarghatta, and I had gone to meet her. That was one
Okay.
of my most defining moments with elephants. Okay, so I'm just telling you this because it will give you context into where I am today. But yeah, just keeping the thread of elephants alive. So that
Okay.
first I met elephant in Banarghatta. Then when I was working with rescue had got one of their first rescue elephants coming in, who was from a circus, I think she was. I can't remember, but she was older, and she finally went to Wildlife SOS, I think. But yeah, at that point, I mean, she was staying in Pune, and we were managing her medicine and care and all of that. So that was the first time I handled a rescue elephant as a vet. But I was mostly a stray dog vet otherwise, stray animal.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, elephants would be a very different and maybe sometimes difficult experience because of the sheer size, and also, like, they are very sensitive actually as an animal. What I've
100%,
seen.
100%. But I guess we'll get to that eventually. So now going back to your PFA question, what was PFA like? PFA was, so let me tell you, just, as an aside, so that this is just for general public to know, that a veterinarian who works in a trauma center in a city is generally very traumatized. Okay, you see one of the
Okay.
ugliest sides.
Yeah, it was different, depressing. Yeah.
Very, very depressing. I mean, and if you're a person who is sensitive, and I am, I used to get very, very burnt out very quickly, because it's just, you're seeing so much cruelty, you're seeing so much neglect, you're seeing so much like the worst side of human nature. Yeah, I mean, sad, but that's the truth of what urban animals go through every day.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is sad. Even like when I go for bird watching, or wildlife trails or those kind of things, you see so much roadkill or injured animals. It is very sad actually to see, but
Yeah,
actually it seems like it is a sad reality.
it is a sad reality, and something I think we don't talk about enough. I mean, I would love to talk about it more one day, about, what it means to, like, what is the importance of, community animals in urban areas, how we can do more to
Yes.
care for them. I mean, I feel like they're such a neglected part of society, and they are a part of society. Society does not just mean humans. I think this is one of the biggest problems we're having with humanity, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. I think even at broad policy level or those kind of things, animals are also always second thought. But I think with more, passionate advocacy and citizen action and some pressure, I think hopefully in future we'll see more inclusion.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is something I really want to do. I think, as my career expands, it's something I like. After having a child, that's another thing. I realize that educating children is really the only way forward. I mean, adult people are like a lost cause mostly, but with kids, to like teach them that society really comprises of trees, animals, insects, humans. All of us together are society, and why it's so important for us to lean on each other, and build community with all of these different species. So I think that's something that I hold very near and dear to my heart, and something I really want to work on in like the next phase of my life, somehow contribute to that.
Yeah, I think I agree, and even I work with children for nature education. I think they have that kind of curiosity and wonder about nature, which can be definitely channelized for conservation. And I think because adults they are more set in their ways, it's easier to actually influence the actions and thoughts of kids more
Correct.
than adults.
100%. Yeah, because they don't have all those stupid biases, about how great human beings are.
Yeah, that is definitely a big one.
Yeah. But no, sorry, did I answer your question? Sorry, I lost the plot.
Yeah. So it must have been a very intense experience for you working with the PFA,
It
and
was.
kind of different than the rescue stint, different in the intensity.
I mean, I don't know if it was still, even with rescue, I was still doing urban trauma care. With PFA, I was again doing urban trauma care. I mean, and again, when you deal with urban trauma care, anything that comes into the urban like area is basically trauma animal care, right? So you're dealing with horses, cows, dogs, goats, sheep, whatever, all of that. Plus, you're dealing with urban wildlife, plus you're
Wildlife,
dealing with
yeah,
an occasional large animal who's going through that area. So I mean, as a vet, there's really no thing about I only treat small animals or I only treat this. You have to be prepared and sensitive enough to know or work with other individuals who are working in different fields of animals, because at any point you can be called upon to treat something that you're really not comfortable with.
yeah, that's true. One has to be adaptable because like every animal needs like a different method, for rescuing or treating it. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And
it's
treating
important.
it like, I mean, from everything, from handling, from being, how to be sensitive to that animal, what that animal's needs are, what does its diet need to be, what medicines are okay, what is the physiology of that animal. I mean, as a vet is a highly challenging job, actually, in more ways than one. Um, yeah, it's a great job though,
Yeah,
but it's also very
yeah, yeah,
challenging.
yeah. I understand it. Yeah, it must be rewarding to see like when you have treated some animal and it is doing well and it is released later in its habitat. It must be very heartening.
Yeah, oh, that is 100. I mean, it's the feeling of an animal getting better under your care is unmatched. It's like that what was that ad, that American Express ad? You can buy like a ticket and you can buy a meal, but what is that? Like something that was that. What was that ad? I've forgotten that ad also. This is, you can't measure how much this is worth type.
Hmm.
Forget
Yeah,
it. I forgot.
priceless.
Yeah, priceless. Yeah, like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were talking about elephants earlier, and we will get back to that again. So you also worked as a vet with elephant rescue at WRRC, and
Hmm.
as we discussed before, elephants are very unique and intelligent animals, also
Yeah.
very sensitive to human contact. So, how did you adapt your techniques or methods for this stint, and any specific challenges you encountered with elephants?
I mean, yeah, so I've now been working with elephants now. So like they've kind of been like a constant in my life for many, many years now. And now, so and obviously now I'm working with a herd of five female elephants every day. And beyond
Wow,
that, I also consult with elephants like across countries. Like I was in Bangladesh for an elephant. I went to Hyderabad Zoo to consult with their elephants. So I do a lot of elephant stuff now, and I speak to a lot of vets with elephant stuff. But I mean, I think one thing that really helped me was my trauma care kind of background, because um, with elephants, like they like you said, they are very sensitive creatures, and they're um, very emotionally evolved, much more so than us. So there are lots of things about them that we don't understand,
oh,
including
interesting.
sounds that they make that we can't hear. They may, a lot of their communication happens actually with very low levels of sound. So, oops, sorry.
Yes, yes.
Uh, yeah. So with very low levels of sound, so a lot of the times, you won't even know that animals are communicating because they feel things through their feet. They don't have, like, unlike what people think about elephants, that elephants are very large and they're so strong and their skin is so thick and their feet are so hard, and they're really not. Like, I mean, I think the thing that I love telling people for the first time is that whenever I inject an elephant, I use the same size of needle that I would use to inject a cat. And that's how
Oh, really?
sensitive their
That's
skin is.
interesting.
Yeah, they're very sensitive, and their feet are very sensitive. So I mean, bodily, they're very sensitive. Emotionally, they're very sensitive. So sometimes the kind of trauma that they go through, not sometimes, pretty much every time, if they are a captive elephant, they have been through tremendous trauma that you and I will never even understand, the extent of that.
Yeah,
Uh,
the
and
torture and all those
Oh,
things.
a lot of torture. And so, like, I keep telling people, sometimes I feel like working with these rescue rehabbed elephants is like working in in a women's, like women who have been rescued from women trafficking and things like that. It's like working with women from those kind of centers. Because these women, like,
Okay.
they are so happy to be with each other most days, but they have triggers, just like women who have been abused. They have, fears, and they are elephants. They are not women. So you have to be very careful around them because you never know what freaks them out, what scares them. And when they don't mean to cause hurt, they can cause significant damage, you know. But they are surprisingly careful. I mean, they are very, very aware of their bodies and very aware of, what they can do to you in a sense when they are aware. But sometimes they are not aware. And that's why when you're working with wildlife, it's so important to not treat them like a dog, because even a dog can do that. But the harm a dog can cause is also pretty significant. So, I mean, I guess they're all animals. Maybe they just don't treat them like a human. But even humans can cause harm. So I don't know. I give up. But basically, you just have to be careful.
Yeah,
You just have to be careful around them. But they're
yeah.
magnificent animals. I mean, I adore working with them. I still have so much to learn. I'm learning stuff every day. But yeah, I mean, that's how it goes.
So, I mean, I had a question. Maybe it's not very logical, but
Hmm.
like if you're working with elephants for several years, so do they recognize you like not maybe as Suranjana, but as somebody who's doing good for them, and they try to interact or cooperate more when you're treating them or something like that.
100%. I mean, these girls, I mean, these aunties, I call them all aunties, but my the herd of aunties, these guys, like, they literally can hold my hand and take me to a spot that's bothering them. Like, I mean, one
Wow.
of the elephants, when I went to, and I go and speak to them, right? I'm just like, okay, is everything okay? Like, like, what are the scenes? Like, where is it hurting? Is there a particular problem? And most days they don't even care. They're just like, no, nothing, whatever. We're just going about our business. But if there is something that's bothering them, like one of the elephants, she held my hand and she pulled me across and she pointed to her tooth and she was like, "Can you please check this?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll check
Oh,
this." So yeah, I mean, they definitely they definitely recognize me. I can't say that they all love me unconditionally because at the end of the day, I'm still a vet. I mean, I come there and I do things to them, but yeah, I mean, there is definitely mutual love.
that's very nice to hear. Yeah. So we now come to a different kind of work you are doing at Reef Watch, where you work with the marine standings and marine rescue, which is entirely a different ball game, I think, than
Yeah.
land-based animals, because the threats they face is very different from the nets and similar issues. So, yeah, are there any specific, issues or challenges or observations you have made with respect to working with marine animals?
I mean, I would say that it's actually not that different in a sense, because, they still are targets of a lot of human activity and things like that. But I think the biggest challenge is to get people to understand the scale of damage that people cause, because,
Yeah.
they don't see it on a regular basis. They don't see ghost nets, they don't understand where that fish on their table is coming from. So I think that is the biggest challenge, is to kind of, put across to people that, listen, just because you don't live in the ocean does not mean that the threats there are not real. Those threats are really real, and those have an impact on everything. So that, I feel like, that the visibility is the biggest challenge over there, you know
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, like even if you know even if a person living in a land-based city is, you know mm, maybe he or she or they are ordering something which is like a kind of an endangered fish or something like that, even they are doing as much damage as those who are doing ghost nets and those kind of things physically in the ocean.
100%.
So yeah,
I mean, forget about that. Like, think about even somebody who, even all of us, for doing simple things like, not understanding where our waste is getting disposed, not being responsible with
yeah,
what we use, what we consume. And, I'll tell you, like, we have done postmortems on turtles. We have had turtles in our care that have pooped out all kinds of
plastic is
plastic
a
from,
big issue.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
all kinds
yeah,
of
yeah,
end caps to labels of, Lay's packets and UB labels and pads, sanitary napkins, and chai cups,
sad.
and all kinds of things. So I mean, I think the thing that I really want to push, the idea to people is how interconnected everything really is. I mean, that simple
Definitely.
choice that you make, that you think will not have an impact on anyone, will have an impact on everyone, because everything stays. Everything is connected. The choices you make a difference to the animals and your community around you, and that community is not just humans but everyone else.
Yeah, yeah, it's a kind of butterfly effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was also very informative. So we now will move towards a new initiative of yours, or maybe we can call it a brainchild, which is a Wolfwagon, an animal boarding and care service, which you founded in 2016. So can you tell us a bit more about this endeavor and how the journey has been?
I mean, I'll be very honest, okay? Wolfwagon was started like as a way to make money, because when you're a wildlife vet, you don't really get paid a lot of money, okay? Like, a
Okay.
lot of the work that you do really is unpaid, charitable, or very, very poorly paid. So, I mean, if you compare, say, and you were saying that wildlife vetting is not as common in India, uh, it's because there's no money there. So people would rather go into small animal
Okay.
practice and things like that, because you make a lot more money, and money, we all need money to survive, yeah, to an extent.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so we've all yeah, so I mean, Wolfwagon was came up when I was in Mysore, when I was working with PFA, to kind of help substitute, like, add something to my income, and yeah, so I mean, it's, but obviously, like, with the Wolfwagon, I was always very keen on making sure that I built it with the vision that my dogs would board there. And so the whole thing was, I spent a lot of time researching how big the kennels have to be, where I wanted it. I wanted it to be in with a lot of trees. I wanted to make sure that the animals had a lot of space. So I built it like exactly with the perfect vision that I had in my head. I mean, it's been a huge challenge to run. I'm not going to lie about, like, logistics and staff, and figuring out
Scale. Yeah.
processes and finances, and like any business, it's a ongoing business. So it's something that you have to keep looking at, and changing, and going with the times. But it's also been a really interesting part of my life. It's always been there. It's a been like a somewhat like little source of income with things. But yeah, I mean, it's an exciting project to kind of at least have some entrepreneurial part of my brain working, which I don't
Yeah, yeah,
get.
it must be a very kind of different kind of experience than actually the job part.
Yeah,
And yeah, always good to have say, multiple sources of income, especially in this field. Uh,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
you got to
yeah.
substitute
And so,
thousands of
how
people
has the response been? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with
How has the
Mysore.
response been like from pet owners for the Wolfwagon, and like interactions with people who own pets?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like, touchwood, it's been great. I mean, we've been consistently doing really well. Like, luckily, I've never we've broken even from day one of creating the kennel. So it's but not broken even. I mean, we've not covered the cost of building it, but at least running costs. But like, I mean, you get to meet a lot of really interesting people. When I was there, now I'm not there, so I don't meet that many people anymore. But yeah, I mean, the response is great. People, like, I get so many, like, very sweet, kind messages from pet owners saying thank you so much for creating the facility, and because there really isn't a facility like that in Mysore at all.
I see.
So yeah, so that was fun to do. It's fun. It's still fun to keep doing.
Yeah, that's nice. And I think maybe Bangalore, being big city, will have these places a lot. But maybe Mysore being little bit on the uh,
Oh yeah.
kind of
When we
outskirts of Bangalore,
started,
so maybe not many will be there like that.
yeah, I mean, when we started the Wolfwagon, I think everyone thought I was insane because they were like, "Why would you start?" Everyone in Mysore keeps their pets in the house because everyone in Mysore has gardens and they have gated houses, and and they've got staff. So they don't. The concept of boarding in Mysore didn't exist. So when I moved there from Pune with my three dogs, I remember I needed to travel, and I was like, "Okay, let's look for boarding facilities." And they gave me one card saying, okay, this is a highly recommended boarding place. So I was like, okay, great. I called them and they were like, we
Okay,
have two cages on the terrace and we feed them pedigree twice a day. I was like, listen,
that's
that's
it.
not happening. So yeah, that's how the Wolfwagon was born. Literally, actually, of a personal need of mine.
I see. And now it has become something big.
Yeah, I know. It's mad how things happen.
So yeah, it has been a very interesting conversation so far. So we'll go to recounting any incidents or stories which you would have had from your uh, vast experience working with wildlife of different kinds and treating different animals. So yeah, like any interesting stories or thrilling moments with your
Goodness, but
rescue so
I
far.
don't know where to begin. But I guess like for me working with like see the thing is like I said, elephants have always been a theme in my life, and animals have always been there. But marine animals was never something I really dealt with, and it kind of was like I almost
Kind
literally
of
tripped
new.
and fell into it. I tripped and fell into marine, becoming a marine vet in this country. I don't know how this even happened, but yeah, but like it just did. And I actually love working with sea turtles because you'll be surprised at how much personality these turtles have, and such like they're like cats, with their preferences. Like my God, they only like this kind of fish. They only like it at this time. They only like it. They're just
Choosy.
very specific, and they get upset. Like they get visibly upset at you. They like they have this. They'll make an ugly face and they spray water out their nostrils at you if they get irritated with you. So it's like
I see.
they're actually great fun to work with, as creatures.
Would be interesting to see it sometime. The
Yeah, yeah.
behaviors. Yeah.
But that's what I said. That's the thing with these animals. You don't like what are you? The only thing you see about them is people diving, or you'll see like a passing video of a sea turtle. But how many people are spending time interacting with sea turtles? I mean,
Yeah.
thankfully they don't. I mean, it's a great thing. But I'm just saying, sorry. But yeah, these they're amazing. And so sometimes I think for me with sea turtles, we've had some major wins in our rescue ops over the years. And one of the turtles that was like a major win for us was this young green sea turtle who had come in last year, in the beginning of standing season, which was around this time last year, and stayed with us all the way till the end, which was almost September. And I really like, I mean, there were multiple points
Okay.
through that time that we really thought that that this animal was not going to make it. There is no, like, she was so dull and so depressed. And and kudos to my team in Goa, for like they like following instructions to the T. But we managed to bring her out of it. She pooped out a lot of plastic, that came out of her. Unfortunately, that was what she was very sick with, different bits of plastic in her gut, and an infection. But we managed to get that all out. We managed to get her swimming and diving, and we released her, which was like a huge moment for all of us, a huge win.
Oh, that must be like very miraculous kind of thing, and so
100%.
must be so glad to see it.
Fully. I mean, sea turtle releases, they are like, we've done like quite a few of them now. But every time, like I keep telling my team, when I'm in Goa or when I'm in Karnataka for a sea turtle release, I feel like I'm going to do an exam. I get that nervous chills, like I get like this pit in the bottom of my
Yeah.
stomach. It's always like, is she going to be able to
Judgment
dive?
day kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because if they can't dive, we have to bring them back. And sometimes in the open ocean, that's not easy. And we can't
Yeah.
leave a turtle there just hanging around if she's not healthy and she can't dive. So so it's always a very frantic, scary time for me. Like, and when releases go off well, it's like, it feels like the ultimate, like gratitude, full gratitude when it happens.
Yeah, that's true. So the next question was about the most challenging operation of animals you have faced so far. But I think the green sea turtle one you mentioned also would have had its challenges.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like with a lot of veterinary work, everybody talks about surgery so much, but surgery to me is like, I mean, I've done a lot of surgeries over the years. It's not my favorite thing to do. I prefer to I love medicine. Medicine is definitely my thing. And surgery
Okay.
happens when it needs to happen. But, I strongly and firmly believe that most animals have a very deep healing capacity within them. That sometimes all we as vets need to do is support that and recognize that and
Mm-hmm.
not be aggressive about trying to fix things. So sometimes just time and respect heals a lot of things. So that's why, I mean, I wouldn't want to talk about like the most challenging surgeries I've done a few, and oh my god. But I think it's a lot more, the focus needs to be a lot more on respect and time and innate healing capacity of these animals.
Yeah. Healing and medicine, if it happens, then it's better. And maybe if like the last resort, then maybe surgery can be used
Correct.
as an option.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked before about the interaction of citizens uh, to coordinate all these things in treatment. So before treatment comes the rescue part, where maybe people in the NGO or maybe any other citizens who saw the injured animal, they are
Yeah.
involved in this process. So yeah, how important is this aspect, and how has your experience been with citizens and coordinating these things?
I mean, citizens are the backbone of these things. And I think that's why, with a lot of times, when people say they feel helpless and they don't know what to do, like there's so much they can do just by being plugged in, just by noticing and reporting. I mean, our entire Karnataka marine project is just based on citizen action. So people go to the beaches, they see injured or dead, marine megafauna, and they report it to us, and that's how we know that these animals are there. That's how we can build our reports and talk about things. So citizen action, community action, community work, working with the people is very, very important. I mean, I don't even know how to like give it prime importance at this point. So I feel like each and every person can contribute so deeply to conservation, just by being plugged in, just by reporting, just by knowing who your organizations are around you, and by being sensitive to these animals, like recognizing them as part of your community as well.
Yeah, and yeah, I think even it's important for citizens, even if they feel like giving the animal some food or water, or taking it, especially birds. I've seen like people want to take it in a box in their home, but it's always better to instead contact professionals who will do it more properly.
Yes, that's very, very important, because sometimes, I mean, people do it out of, they're well meaning at the end of the day, and they want to help. But, sometimes we don't realize,
Yes.
and it takes many years of experience also to kind of understand what is a to do and a not to do, for making sure that that animal can be rehabilitated into its own world at some point. So yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point. Like when people rescue animals or pick up wildlife off the streets or whatever, it's important to keep contact to a minimum. It's important to make sure you don't force feed food or water, and contact somebody there or contact a professional immediately. Because the seconds matter with rescue and rehab. Every second matters, and especially the early time.
Yeah. The quicker you start the process, the more the chances are of the animal recovery.
100%. And also, not only the quicker you start the process, also how you handle that animal when you're trying to rescue it, that can
Yes,
basically kill.
yes.
So, I mean, we've seen that so much. So we keep harping on the importance of how to handle or how not to handle. Even if you see something and you don't want to handle, just stay close and call somebody who can.
Yeah, that's true. So we, we talked a lot about urban communities. You were mentioning animals being part of the community, and animal rescue in urban regions, animal, how they are treated in urban regions. So you would
Yeah.
have seen a lot of urban animals and their injuries, or coordinate rescues. So we would like to know, like, according to your observations, what are the major causes of injuries? Like, there are so many threats they face, like roadkills, or even for birds, it's manja, or sometimes it's people who are trying to hunt them. So, what would you say are the major threats for
I
the
mean,
with
see, in
respect
a
to the
like
injuries?
it now depends on which part you're asking. Like if you're saying urban wildlife, what their threats are, I mean, I don't work hands-on with urban wildlife every day. But I mean, like you said, those are very real threats, pesticides, heating, like what's that word? Hypothermia, nets, manja, all of these things are cutting down of trees. All of these things are big problems with urban wildlife. But with the animals that I work with, obviously with stray dogs, cats, and urban domestic animals, the threats are huge with traffic and all of that is one. But something that a lot of people don't understand is some of the biggest threats these animals face are negligence and cruelty from people. So
Yeah,
like human caused cigarette burns, acid burns, tying of crackers, tying of leashes too hard, tying of string, all kind horrible, like, oh my god, like you work with urban domestic animals and you will never want to work with human beings again, or you're just like, I just need to work with education and human beings, something is really wrong with this race. but
yeah,
but even with, say, like elephants, or marine life, just irresponsible, like with, obviously, with elephants, something that I really urge people is, please don't want to go. And I mean, I know you may love an elephant, and you should, and they're majestic, amazing creatures, but they should not, the way you interact with them should not be washing them, holding their hand, feeding them, watching them paint, riding on them. These are not the way, this is not the way to appreciate an animal. Seeing them in a temple, getting blessings from them, like, if you love this animal, observe it in its natural habitat. The things you will never understand, the depth of emotion this animal has, will only come out when you are watching it with its own family. And don't take that
yeah.
away just for your own need to want a picture with this animal, or whatever it is. Like, that's something I really want people to understand, because these animals go through horrendous torture. And even with movies like The Elephant Whisperer and things, where everyone was really amazed and they were like, wow, look at the relationship this animal had with the people. Yes, I mean, definitely these animals are capable of those kind of emotional relationships, but it's misplaced, right? Because at the end of the day, that young calf will also go and have its spirit broken and have to be trained and have to be integrated into a human herd. So it's just I mean, you don't know, there's a lot of background cruelty that goes on with captivity, and captivity is not the answer.
Yeah, I mean, the temple thing is very, it has been actually very long running thing. And yeah, like, animals are not commodities to be used for humans to do their things. Like, yeah, elephant is something, as you said, should be admired in its natural habitat. And I am lucky actually to have seen elephants also in wild. So yeah, they are truly majestic, and it is sad to see, like, them being used by humans for all these different purposes, just for their own use.
Yeah, it's really sad, and it's really upsetting, and it makes me filled with rage. But what to do? That's life.
Yeah, yeah.
And also
So
simple things. So one more thing that I just wanted to say, and with marine life, right? Like with a lot of people, they don't understand, how they can do anything for marine life, because it's like, it's marine life. Like, what difference does it make? There are so many things you can do, right? Like simple things. Like, do you go and visit the beach? If you visit the beach, try and go to places that don't have direct light on the water, because that is really
yeah,
disturbing to marine life, right?
definitely.
Like, so hidden, like
Yeah,
kind of downward lighting. If people are aware, they will insist on these things. Also, be aware about how you manage your waste at home. Why it's important to segregate waste, why it's important to reduce waste, because all your solid waste ends up in the ocean. And this ocean, and this
yeah,
ocean deals with your sewage. It ends up creating parasite loads and killing pelagic birds. It ends up killing marine life. The plastic choices that you make end up in the guts of these majestic sea turtles that live for thousands of years, that we don't even understand most about their life and their emotional quotient, that their anything. We don't understand anything about these animals, you know. So so just be mindful with the way you live, because all your choices have impacts on everything else, and everything is alive, and everything is your community. You know, you are part of all of this.
Yeah, you're right. We if we human beings are really as intelligent as we think ourselves to be, we have to be really mindful of our actions affect every living thing. That's definitely true.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So as you said, wildlife veterinary field in India is like not as widespread as, let's say, wildlife biology or allied fields. So uh, right now at this stage, do you see it as being more accessible with respect to education than when you began, or you think it's still in its infancy?
I mean, I think maybe so. Like the small animal field is quite saturated. It's getting highly corporatized. You know, that is a whole nother ball game. So I mean, for vets graduating, there's a lot more prospects than there were when I graduated, for sure. But it's. I feel like it's not a healthy it's not a healthy way for this industry to go, to get corporatized. And I really think that vets also need to rally together and push against these corporations, because the quality of medicine, you know, the kind of work that you put in, all of that drops when you have targets to hit. But you know, in terms of wildlife, I mean, wildlife is still early days. There's still a long way for it to go. There's, you know, the field has to mature. The money has to match it, because people are working in this field are putting their lives at risk every day. You know, as a vet, because you have to go up close to these animals. It's not just a question of observing them from a distance. So you know, I think there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. By corporate, you mean like it becoming more like corporate companies and that kind of environment where
Yeah.
you're results
So you
oriented
know,
rather than like person
yeah.
to person.
Exactly, because what's happening is that I think there was some article and all of that, you know, a while ago saying that the pet industry is the fastest growing industry in India at the moment. So everybody is jumping into this, you know, and everyone wants to get involved in the pet industry somehow to get like capital returns and whatnot. So what happens then is the field gets really, I feel that the field gets really corrupted in that case, because it ends up with, you know, with profit being the bottom line. You know, goal of everything, which is not what medicine is. I mean, in a way it'll also be a good
Yeah,
thing, because it'll probably, you know, bring a lot more money into the sector, so it might mature the sector. But for the sector to mature completely, I think it'll have to go through this phase and come out on the other side, you know. So maybe it's all part of the process.
yeah. There still need to be the human touch and not just results and money and kind of those kind of things.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this has been a very different kind of perspective again from this podcast. So just the last two questions, which you always ask any of our speakers.
Hmm.
So uh, one of the final questions is like, as a woman working in this wildlife veterinary field, so what kind of challenges have you faced uh, in your journey so far?
I mean, I've just been dismissed. I still get dismissed a lot. It's just like, you know, because people see me and they're like, oh, she's just like a random young girl, like she doesn't know anything. And, you know, before I used to get really upset by it, because people would walk in and
Oh,
like, even with my own clinic, I've had people walking in, and my husband, who's also a vet, would be standing there, and they, you know, and I would be treating their dog, but I would be madam and he would be doctor, and they would all look at him and ask him the questions like I was just, you know, the veterinary tech. Suddenly, the minute the man's in the room, the woman becomes invisible, you know. So
yeah. It's
so that happens to
that
me
is
a lot, and it used to be very upsetting to me early days, but now I don't mind it at all. It's kind of fun to see people look a little panicked after I start talking, you know. So they initially assume that I don't know anything, and then when I start talking, then everyone suddenly gets like quite nervous, which is fun. It's fun to watch.
yeah, people have these sometimes they have these preconceived notions and they let that cloud their judgment.
Oh, 100%. It happens to me all the time. But now it's
Oh, I
funny.
see.
Now it's funny. Like when I had a senior vet when I was in Bangladesh and I went there and he looked at me and he was like, "Who gave you the authority to treat this animal?" And
Oh, oh
something
boy.
he looked and because they knew I was a vet, but they didn't know anything beyond that. So then the person who had brought us there, she was not in the room at that point. But then she walked in and she was like, "Oh, let me introduce our guests." And she introduced me, and that vet looked so nervous. He was
He,
like, "Oh, sorry, ma'am, sorry." I was like, "Okay, that's funny," but he didn't mean it, poor
yeah,
guy. But like, what to do? That's just as a woman in this field, you get dismissed a lot. But
yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, we have had several female speakers speak about this thing, like not being taken seriously. I think is a big issue, and
yeah,
they need a
yeah.
lot of time to reverse that kind of opinion.
I don't think I don't even know. I mean, maybe it'll get reversed. Hopefully, it will. But I think with a lot of it, it's just a question of like learning to roll with the punches. Like for me, it's just been that, and
Yeah,
whatever. It's been a journey, and it'll continue to be a journey.
yeah, that's true. It takes time for these prejudices to change. So because it has been a very
100%.
long-standing thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So finally, we will ask like a common question which we ask every speaker. So, as a wildlife vet and a wildlife specialist, like, what kind of message would you like to send to any budding vets or budding rescuers who want to contribute something to this field?
I mean, the thing that I always tell everybody is the number one thing in my mind is if it brings you joy and if it's something that you really want to do, please do it. And I know the money will be challenging initially, but when you're really good at something, the money will eventually come. Or you will learn how to do side gigs and make sure that you follow your passion. But if this is something you're passionate about and this field needs that, it needs people to care, the world needs people to care. So please care, and we all know everybody does care, so it's just a question of following that.
Yeah, it's important to work with something which you really are passionate about. That's true. That's true for
Yeah,
in any field, but especially in wildlife because it is a very challenging and adventurous field. So you have to like it when you're doing it.
yeah, and you need community, like, I mean, at the end of the day, we all need people to lean
Yeah,
on, because there's so many times working in these things where you get disheartened and you get depressed, and like it happens to all of us. There are days which are particularly hard, and you just lean on each other and you lean on the people around you and your family and things like that, and reach out and build connections, and those are important to work together.
yeah, definitely. If you want to make the environment and the world a better place, community is a must to bring about the change. One person can't do everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, we'll end this podcast. It has been a very nice discussion. So thank you, Suranjana, for talking with us. And I'm sure our listeners will learn a lot of very insightful things after listening.
Thank you. It's been great being on this podcast. I really enjoyed it.